Welcome to the UIAAA Connection podcast. Hometown Ticketing is proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UIAAA Connection podcast and to provide schools nationwide with the best options for digital ticketing for their events. Visit their website at hometownticketing.com to learn how they can make digital ticketing possible and simple at your school. Thank you to Hometown Ticketing for their exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch Hunter. Today we have as our special guest, Trish Witkin, Certified Master Athletic Administrator, Director of Athletics at Glastonbury, is that how you say it? Glastonbury High
correct.
School, and former president of the NIAAA. Trish, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Mark.
Let's have you start by sharing with our audience here in Utah and across the nation where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job.
All that good stuff. Okay. So I grew up in a town called Wappingers Falls, New York. Lived there most of my life until I came to Connecticut to go to college. And came to college, played softball there for 4 years, had the opportunity to walk on to the volleyball team for 1 year. And that was my junior year. I elected not to go back my senior year because I was doing an internship and playing softball. So thought it would be a little challenging. As far as my first job goes, I've had several. Probably one of the first would be Baskin Robbins, and it was located inside the mall. So it was a big social hangout, and we'd get all the people from the community coming before heading to the movies down at the other end of the mall. So it was a great job.
In the mall in which town?
Oh, that was actually in Poughkeepsie, New York, which is the town just north of where I grew up.
Okay. All right, excellent. And so you went to college, but I didn't catch where you went to college.
Oh, I went to the University of Hartford.
Okay, and you played softball there. Were you on scholarship, I assume?
Yep. Yeah, I was a scholarship player, pitched for 3.5 years. I had an injury in October of my senior year and needed to do some rehab. At the time of my injury, they told me that I wouldn't write or throw ever again. So getting back to pitching would be a little bit difficult. So I just worked on rehabbing to get back to play. And I started in the outfield and enjoyed the rest of my senior year.
So you haven't thrown since, I assume?
I've thrown since, but not competitively.
No, okay, perfect. And so did you have a chance to play a lot of youth sports when you were growing up, softball, volleyball, that type of thing?
Yeah. So growing up, I'm one of 8 kids, and we pretty much grew up at the ball field. So all of my siblings and I played baseball or softball. So that's really where I got my start. And I played Little League, and then I played some travel ball, and I played some local rec ball before heading off into high school and then to college. We didn't have volleyball. I didn't play any other sport until I got to high school, but did do a lot of played on several teams throughout my youth, heading into college, and then in the summers between college to stay sharp at the game.
So you saw some of the effects of the early days, obviously not back in 72 because you're much younger than that, but you saw some of the effects with some of the girls' sports being offered where they probably weren't 10 years before you played.
Yeah, so I really benefited from the Title IX legislation. There were a lot of programs already in place, and so by the time I got to the point of playing in high school, pretty well established. My high school was adding sports. As my senior year, I remember they added field hockey. I was already playing volleyball, so it was something I had enjoyed in phys ed class, but never had the opportunity to play. I had really loved volleyball, so I stuck with that. But I do believe that I was more a beneficiary of it than really somebody that had to endure the hardships of pre-Title IX.
Sure. Excellent. Let's talk for a moment about some of the mentors you've had in your lives. Mentors, coaches, parents, those type of people that had a profound effect upon you.
Yeah. Well, I would say first and foremost, my parents. They've provided me every opportunity I needed to be successful. They afforded myself and my siblings those opportunities, and challenged us, encouraged us to um, to join and be involved and love what we do. One of the things they instilled in us very early on was you make a commitment and you stick to it, and that's something to this day. Even my own children, I've said the same thing to them. You don't quit. You figure out how to work out your situations or your issues, and you get better. And that's how that goes. I think my siblings too, I think were mentors to me. Certainly inspired me to do some of the things. Some from the competitive side, wanting to be involved in sports and things because they were very good competitors themselves. My two older sisters were both catchers, and they were really outstanding catchers that had come through the high school. And I did not want to be a catcher. I wanted to be somebody that didn't follow in their path, but maybe stood out on my own. So they really inspired me to try something else, which was pitching. And that was something that I did year round and enjoyed and saw some success. So those were some of my early inspirations and mentors. And then as I got into more career related things, Fred Balsamo, who is somebody who took me under his wing very early on. I was in a really unique situation. I had signed up for the coaching education class that we take in Connecticut. But by the time my opportunity to take the class came around, I had been hired as an AD. So I sat through the class and I met him that way. And so for many, many years, and to this day, he's been somebody that I have counted on, and he's been a tremendous supporter of mine. Another individual is Barbara Startup, who is a longtime athletic director here in Connecticut, very well known, really paved the path for women and other administrators to be successful in athletics. And the really cool story about Barbara is I knew that I wanted to work in athletics, but when I was in college, I thought I was pursuing college athletics. And it was in grad school when some friends encouraged me to go talk to their high school athletic director. And I was living here locally in Connecticut, and they were from Connecticut. So I just called her up and I told her who I was and what I wanted to do. And she made an appointment with me. And the day of my appointment came, and we talked for an hour without interruption. She never looked at her clock. She never answered the phone. And I left so inspired. And I knew from that moment on that I was no longer pursuing college athletics, that I wanted to be in education-based athletics. And so a period of time went by. I went back to my job at the University of Hartford, where I was now working as a grad student, and a job opened up. And I called her and I said, I don't know if you remember me. And she says, oh, I do. And I said, what do you think of this job? And she said, not only do I think it's a great place for you to start, I'm going to write you a letter. And she did. And I got the job. And from that day forth, up until her retirement, she was just somebody I counted on. She took all my calls, really, really an inspiration. And I'd say a true pioneer in education-based athletics here.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing. Let me go off script here for a moment, because you have 7 brothers and sisters.
Yeah,
I have 8. And so
Oh.
my first question is, what number are you in the order?
Number 4.
You're number 4, so 3 older and 4 younger.
4 younger, yep.
And sisters and brother both older and younger?
Yeah, so I have 2 older sisters and an older brother, and 3 younger brothers and a younger sister. So 4 and 4.
And so how was the dinner table? I ask you because I'm telling you what, I know that mine could have been, it was really crazy with 9 kids at once around the dinner table.
So one of the things that I remember very fondly of our childhood is we always had dinner together. And so my mom would cook dinner, and we would be out in the neighborhood playing, and they had a bell. And when that bell rang, everybody knew Slocums have to go home for dinner. And we always ate together, and there was often an extra chair because there was usually someone else that was around, and they'd come and join us for dinner. And I remember my parents always saying, if you want it, grab it, because it might not make it around the table the second time. And it was just great. Lots of conversation, lots of laughter, just a lot of time, well spent together. And we started to lose a little bit of that as we got older and we were playing sports and we were out. So we spent a lot of time on the road or at the ball field. But that was something we always came back to. It was big in our family.
Excellent. I had to go there because there's not a whole lot of people in our field or any field that have as many siblings as we have.
Yeah.
So bless you and bless your family. So let me ask you this, Trish. What's your biggest failure or disappointment, and what did you learn from it?
I'd say probably my failure to recognize the importance of that balance of family and career. Very early on, I had this opportunity to be an athletic director. I was young, I was new. It was my first job, so I wanted to do well, and I wanted to be everything that I needed to be for my district. I had 2 high schools and a middle school, so I was out a lot. And I didn't do a really good job of understanding and appreciating that it was a lot of time spent away from my family and a lot of things that I missed along the way. My husband took on the burden of a lot of that and gave up any opportunity that he had to coach or to run intramural programs. He's a teacher and he's outstanding at those things, but he put that aside so that I could grow in my career. And it took me a while to figure that out. I think you take for granted when you have, or I will say, I took for granted that I had this person who just stepped in and did everything when the girls were really young. And so it took me a while, but then I figured that out, and how I remedied it was I started to put the family first. I started to prioritize that. The job is going to still be there. The job is still going to go on, and I can do good work and be successful and be present for my athletes and coaches, but I can also make my family a priority too. So I shifted gears and was a very positive change from there.
Very good. Let's talk for a moment about the job of AD. You've been an AD what, for over 30 years now?
No, I think I'm about 24.
Okay, so you've been an AD for 24 years. How is the job different today without COVID? Because obviously that changed everything, but without COVID, how is the job different today than when you first started 24 years ago?
It's exponentially different. The responsibilities have increased, the expectations are greater, the demands are more challenging. I see a rise in responsibility and a decrease in support in some areas, and not necessarily specific in my case, but in talking with a lot of my colleagues. I think technology has changed things, and for the better. Everything, and I'm sure everything was pen and paper. We were just talking the other day about the whole process of officials being assigned, and now we're using the arbiter, and there's assigners for each of the sports. But back when I first started, and again, I had 2 high schools and a middle school, so I had 6 basketball teams at one school, 6 at the other, and then 2 at the middle school. We'd have to get officials for all of those, so we would have to send our schedules on paper to the assigner, who would then on a triplicate carbon copy form write every single game, the date, the time, the location, and then assign officials. And it was all on paper, and we would have to pass paper around to, I would mail you my schedule and every other opponent, and then you'd have to wait for them to. So technology really changed that. And for us in Connecticut, we were really fortunate that through our state association, we had an individual that created what we call the Eligibility Center. And while it was hard to adapt to it in the beginning, it was a game changer where we could do everything that we needed to do right there in that one eligibility center. So scheduling, confirming schedules, making changes, putting in your rosters and eligibility of your student athletes. We could communicate with athletic directors. So email came in and was really big at that point. But then on the flip of it, it also took away some of the personal side of what we used to do. You picked up the phone and you talked to people. Now it's an email and a text message. So you have to be a little bit more creative to continue with those personal contacts that we had early on. So some good, some bad. The responsibilities and the challenges of the job have definitely increased. It just seems like there's more sports, there's more situations, there's more regulations that we're following.
Sure, more sports, more levels. I will throw, you may find this interesting. You mentioned that you use Arbiter. Arbiter is a Utah company. Not that I'm bragging, but obviously when I was a working AD, we used them. Everybody in Utah used them. But I would never mail the check to Arbiter. I would get in my car, drive a third of the mile down the street to where their office was and drop the check off, because it took 5 days to get in the US mail to get there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's just one of many game changers with the technology. So
Yeah.
let's have you talk now about your journey with the CAAD and, of course, nationally with the NIAAA, and how that began, and maybe share some experiences from each of those.
Sure. So my introduction to CAD came about 2002, 2003. I was asked to serve as a district rep on the CAD board, which I accepted because some of the best advice I ever received was get involved, and that's how you learn and grow. And so this opportunity presented, and I took advantage of that. I've been on the CAD board ever since, serving in numerous capacities, including a term as president. And I continue to serve as the secretary. I'm the professional development coordinator. I'm the NIAAA liaison to CAD, and so lots of work that I do still there. It was through my involvement with CAD that I happened to be in the right place at the right time. In Section 1, it's our turn for to place a person on the NIAAA board once there's eight states in Section 1. So it's a 24-year cycle. And I just happened to be at that point where Fred was having some conversations with me and asked me what I thought about that opportunity, and would I be willing to commit to it for the full term and what have you. And I jumped at that opportunity, and was then appointed the Section 1 representative to the board. And through that opportunity, as you know, as a board member as well, you have the opportunity to put your name in for the president-elect process. And that was a condition with Fred. We joke about it a lot, but he said, you're not only committing to 3 years, you're committing to potentially serving the membership in that capacity.
Oh, I can hear Freddie saying that. There's no question. Yeah. So yeah, continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So so from there, I did put in my name for the president-elect process, and I went through that. And I had the good fortune in my second time to be selected, and then serve the membership as president. And that was 2015.
Yeah, because I remember I had never met you until my last day on the board was your first day on the board, what, in December 2011 in Indianapolis.
Yep, in Indianapolis, exactly. Yeah, that
and
was
Bruce, yeah.
Interesting.
Well, and Bruce was still not too happy with Daryl and I for sneaking down on the field during the president's reception.
I do remember that.
He let us know, yes. Okay, so let's, you brought up the fact that you were blessed to be an NIAAA president, and of course we were blessed by your leadership. So talk about your time as the president of the NIAAA and some of the blessings that brought to you and to the association.
Yeah, well, and I have to say, just personally and professionally, it really is just one of the most tremendous opportunities I've ever been afforded, to have the ability to work. And you know, from being on the board as well, you're surrounded by amazing, resourceful, innovative, wonderful people. And then to have that opportunity to serve like that was great. Probably the couple of things that happened in that particular year. Obviously, membership is always one of the big numbers that we're always looking at, and the programming, what leadership training classes are coming on, and what are the new ones down the pike. But I had the distinction of serving through Bruce's retirement. So I remember vividly sitting in his office, and it was before we were going to do a president-elect session. And he said, I wanted a couple of minutes to talk to you. And I felt my chin hit the floor, and it just wasn't, you know, it's coming, but I wasn't expecting it at that point. And he said to me, you know, you're the right person to lead us through this change. And so, you know, it was inspiring, it was daunting, but you're dealing with really amazing people around that table. And we all came together and got through that initial shock of that. And then of course, elevating Mike to the position. And then we went through the hiring process for that thereafter. So, you know, that was a big thing. But then we also had the passing of Sister Nancy, and that, you know, was it was just prior to going to the national conference. And so we went through, and it was an amazing conference, but it was with a heavy heart in each session, you know, remembering her and trying to celebrate her and support the many, many people that she touched across the country. So it was heavy at the same time that it was really another wonderful conference.
Yeah, absolutely. So during your time on the board, would have been the change from the old boardroom to the new boardroom then, correct?
We were already in the new boardroom during my entire term.
Okay, so obviously they got that fixed after I left and right when you came on, because I only have memories of the old boardroom, which is, as you know, which is Mike's office plus that newer conference area.
Yeah.
And we go to that.
I don't
new
know how you did
board
board meetings in that space.
Well, it was a little bit tight around the table, and it was, you know, I'm sure just like your board meetings there, some people obviously give their opinion on everything and some people don't say a whole lot. But then when those people speak up, in our case, it was Lawrence Johnson from New Mexico. Just loved Lawrence. And I'm telling you what, the discussion would go back and forth and he'd just sit there. But when he spoke, it was like E.F. Hutton, everybody listened.
Yep.
And so it was just a great experience being on the board. Now, let me tie this into my next question. I believe you were also president during the 4th strategic plan. Is that right?
That's correct.
If I believe so, I was a sub chair or committee chair to with Holly and with Sam Rasmussen, and Rich Bouchard was the chair. And if I remember, you were the president when we came back to do our big amount of work in October. And then of course we met in December. So my next question then ties into that, because not only were you the president during the 4th strategic plan, you were the programs chair of the 5th strategic plan. So I haven't had a whole lot. I've had a few of the chairs of the strategic plans on as guests, but I want you to share with our audience here in Utah and across the nation, what's that like? Being on a strategic plan at a national level is kind of raises it to a different level. So I'll just turn the mic over to you and let you talk about it. Share some experience. Sure.
So yeah, you are correct. I was president-elect at the first meeting that the 4th strategic plan committee had at the hotel. And so I was with Andy, and then my term started. So I served during that part. And I really do think that helped me be prepared for serving as a subcommittee chair for the 5th strategic plan. So I got to witness how Rich ran things. I got to witness how you and Sam and Holly, we would just kind of sit in and listen to how the meetings and the discussions were going. So, you know, that was fascinating to be on the outside of that and listening in. And then when it became my turn, first thing I did was call Holly, because she had served as the program chair prior. And I said, help, you know, what do I do here? And what are your suggestions? And she was wonderful. And of course, very resourceful and gave great advice. So then when it started for us and we got together in Indianapolis, you're sitting with just remarkable people from across the country. And I thought the board did a fantastic job of putting together those committees. We were diverse. We came from big schools, little schools, you know, countries, big suburban city schools, anything, you know, across the board. We had just great representation. And I remember sitting, we did a little bit of an icebreaker after the big group icebreaker. And then we sat around the table and the ideas were flying. And it was just a really wonderful exercise. And just no holds barred, just throw everything out there. We threw it up on the board. We talked about it. There was no idea that was silly. There was no idea that was too grand. But it was really a great process and just something I feel really blessed to have been able to be a part of.
Allow me to ask a follow-up. I'm interested in your icebreaker only because it brings back memories of mine, but I'll ask you about yours first, and then I'll talk a little bit about mine. But because I assume, because I knew some of the people, or at least had met them, but there was probably 3 or 4 that I had never met. And so you've got to bring them all together. So I want you to share with our audience what did you use for an icebreaker, because that's kind of crucial in these things, to get everybody going together on the same team.
Yeah. So much like with the 4th strategic plan, where Rich did an icebreaker first, Mark Armstrong did an icebreaker first. And I think it's called Zoom. It was called Zoom, what he did, which is interesting because we just went through a different kind of Zoom. But he had these images, and then we had to figure out how to get into the correct order of all of the images. And that was really fun and exciting and challenging. And then we broke into our individual rooms. So what we did for the icebreaker with the programs, we picked up 2 Jenga games, and back in my office, our assistant athletic director and our department secretary and I just wrote a whole bunch of different, we just cut all these labels, and they just had different categories, questions, things. So it was your favorite movie, your favorite book, tell the person next to you something they don't know about you, or your greatest moment, your biggest fear. And so we set up 2 separate Jenga games, all with, when you pulled out your piece, it had something on it, and you had to do whatever was on that Jenga piece. And one of them was switch groups. And so then just automatically go over, you tap someone on the shoulder and you switch groups. So we tried to make it small and intimate to learn a little bit about each other, but then try to make it a little bit active and switching it up a little bit. And I had a tremendous group. I had Gene Ashen and Doug Kilgore and Peg. And I mean, the list goes on. They were just one after the other, just wonderful. So everybody played along and were good sports about it. And we learned a little bit about each other outside of the athletics and what our job and title is and where we live and work. It was a little bit more just interesting things about you.
Well, that's fabulous. And anytime I'm in a situation like that in the future, I think I'll probably use that. I imagine you can guess what I did. So I had gone to each person separately before we got there. And asked them to pick 2 favorite songs. And so I had the CD there and we played it. And then of course it was the guess of who do you think picked this song? But then when we went to them, we said, well, then why is this your song? Or what part of your life do you remember this? And the great thing, at least for me, is I will hear those songs and I will still go back to that person. I'm trying to think for That's What Friends Are For. And his name's escaping right now, but the fellow from Kentucky, a real good friend of mine, Hugh McReynolds. And so when I hear that, it's just, and of course, then you put me to work for you when you were the president with the same type of things. Because that's just something I had done on the board. And for me, music was that way, but I really think that Jenga idea is an incredible idea. And
well, if you need it, I have 2 sets. I can mail them to you. All set and ready to go.
No, well, I'll just pull the Jenga out and just start putting the stuff on the side. But that's great. And I hope the people out there appreciate that type of activity can bring people from across the nation together and put them in, because if you haven't been in a strategic plan, which you may not in the NIAAA, because there's not a whole lot of people, but there's opportunities in your state for the people that are listening, or opportunities in your district or at a school. I know I've been on a few. And so I just think that's incredible. So thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
Let's talk about now your recent observations, and it's not that recent. It's been over 6 months now, about the conference in Denver, because I know we all said we loved Tampa, and we did love Tampa, but we weren't there in person in Tampa. So share some of your observations about the conference in Denver and how it may have been, or at least felt a little bit different than other conferences that we have attended.
I believe that coming off of COVID, coming off of a few years of not a lot of contact, I found it to be very personal. I found it to be reconnecting. There was a lot of hugging going on, maybe, in spite of CDC recommendations.
Right.
But such great value, getting back together with people and being in person, and the togetherness. We always talk about the value of the national conference, and we try to promote it within our states, as you know, and try to get people there. And once you get there, you'll never miss it again, because you realize just how tremendous it is, and how much you are lifted and fulfilled and recharged and all those wonderful things. But this one felt a little bit extra special, coming off of not seeing one another. I thought they did a fantastic job with the online conference, given the circumstances and the situation. It was great, but it made it extra special to come back and be in person and reconnect with people. And it's what it really felt like. It was reintroducing ourselves to one another, and it was just a very close knit togetherness. So the location was fantastic, and I think people really enjoyed being in the city of Denver, and some took advantage of the opportunities around Denver. It's a beautiful, beautiful state. So that was wonderful. But seeing people in person and being able to just be together was great.
Excellent. Share with our audience, what's the favorite part of your job as the athletic director at Glastonbury High School?
Hands down, seeing our student athletes and our coaches succeed on the field, and in the classroom, and being able to celebrate that. But when you think about the job of an athletic director and all the things that we have to do, and a lot of it is in the office, behind the desk, officials, hiring, scheduling, making changes, dealing with weather, all that kind of thing. When you can be outside or at the court or at the pool, and you're watching your athletes perform and seeing it all come together, I think those are some of the most rewarding moments. And then as they have their success and they advance in the tournaments and things, really being able to go site to site and just see them enjoy that and making those memories. Those are the best times of athletics.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Let's finish up now and ask you a couple of questions. The first of which is, I'm going to ask you for 2 suggestions for a brand new athletic director. And these 2 suggestions would be absolutely imperative in order for them to be successful at their job. What would those 2 suggestions be?
My first one would be get involved. You will learn with every single opportunity, every single conversation, every person that you meet. You will learn something. You will take a tip, a tidbit, a suggestion. Don't be afraid to ask questions. We are each other's best resource. And the more connections and networking you do, the more you're going to learn, the more you're going to grow, the better you're going to be back in your own school with your athletes and with your coaches. So being involved is a big one. And the other one is learn to listen, and learn to listen early on. And I take this from my own experience. There are challenges, there are demands of our job. There are going to be upset people, and you're going to be in difficult situations. And what I learned is I could approach it one of 2 ways. I can approach it where I immediately became defensive. I immediately protected my coaches, and I wasn't really listening to what those concerns might be. And oftentimes, and when I was when I had the realization that if I listened first, if I heard them speak and then share their concerns, and I was present for them, more times than not, we could come to an understanding. And it didn't mean I changed a decision of a coach. It didn't mean that I put a student athlete on a team that got cut, or on a different level of a team, if that was whatever that issue or concern might be. We could still agree to disagree, but I found it to be more valuable and more productive. And they could walk away and say, it didn't end the way I wanted it to, or maybe it did, but at least I was heard. They would walk away and feel like they were heard. And so I changed my approach with that, is I really just tried to take that time to listen and hear what they were saying, and then try to provide some positive encouragement, reinforcement, feedback, whatever the scenario might be. So those would be my two right off the bat.
That's excellent. I love the agree to disagree, because you say it so much better than Dave Mason says it in the song. But that's what it reminds me of. But that is so true, that we can have a difference of opinion, but there's not a reason that you can't sit down and talk it out. So thanks for sharing that. Trish, what question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
Gosh. I don't know. I can't really think of anything. Why do we become athletic directors? Do we ever regret those decisions?
Well, let me ask you, you talked about it a little bit earlier, so we'll finish with this extra question. And I know you talked about that meeting with one of your mentors, but is that really, you wanted to get into interscholastic sports, but was it coaching, or was it an AD when you made that decision? Why did you become an athletic director?
Well, I would have to go back even further. When I was probably 15 or 16 years old, I was, starting to come into my own in athletics and pitching, and starting to really do some good stuff with that. And so we started having the conversation, my father and I, about playing in college. And it was a goal of mine that I wanted to go and play softball in college. So we were talking about college and majors and things, and my dad was a businessman, and I kind of assumed I would go into business and I would work for my dad, and then I would take over my dad's business someday. And my dad's advice to me was, pick something you love, because you're going to do it for the rest of your life. And that stuck with me. So here I was, a high school athlete, feeling like I'm in the prime right now of my life. Nothing better than that. I'm going to have a job in athletics. That's what I want to do. So I went about it a couple different ways. And at the time that I had that meeting with Barbara, and I was in graduate school at that time, I was also had several conversations with our college athletic director, who also happened to be a woman, which is also very inspiring, that she was a female athletic administrator in a Division I school. And if I'm not mistaken, there was only about a dozen across the country at that point, women serving in that capacity. So she had offered me some great advice as well. And one of the things that she shared with me was, if this is what you want to do, you have to go and learn every facet of athletics. So you have to go and be an official, and you have to go and be a coach, and you have to learn about marketing and those types of all the different avenues. I was an intern in sports information at the time, so I knew that aspect of it. And so I did. I went and I coached, and I went and officiated back in my hometown in the Little League program, interestingly enough, with my dad, which was really awesome. But my coaching career was very short, because I went from grad school and I coached while I was in grad school. And then I worked for a couple of years in the admissions office, which is where my grad assistantship was. And then my first job opportunity opened. So I coached softball for 3 seasons, and I had a season of volleyball at the time that I became an athletic director. So I had to give all that up. So it was definitely, coaching. I loved it. And I love the connection with the kids. And to this day, I would tell you that if I could ever coach again, I would definitely go back to the JV level, because I just loved the the eagerness, and they were sponges and they wanted to learn. And it was great breaking things down and showing them why we do the things we do in the way that we do them. But I went really right from college into being an athletic director. But I think those were important steps. I thought her advice was really spot on, because I was able to draw from those experiences when I was interviewing. And then when I became an athletic director, it's really important. You have to understand and appreciate what your coaches are going through. So I was able to draw, while limited, but I was still able to draw from those experiences.
That's a great story. Thanks you so much for sharing. That wraps it up for this edition of the UIAAA Connection. Once again, our guest today has been Trish Witkin, Certified Athletic Administrator, Director of Athletics at Glastonbury High School, and former president of the NIAAA. Trish, thanks for being on the broadcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
For our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.